1986. The Politics of Nuclear Proliferation, 1973. The Future of Nuclear Deterrence in 1986. And a whole host of other books. She's working on a book on this subject right now. And let me not spend any more time introducing George, but let's hear what he has to say. George.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here and for the kind introduction. As said, this is very much a work in progress, and I will give you my initial feelings about pessimism versus optimism, my mid-course feelings, and grounds for leaning either way. Basically, you're all aware of the fact that various people have committed themselves in one way or another to trying to eliminate nuclear weapons, and including Henry Kissinger and George Shultz and two others in the Gang of Four. Before them, General Lee Butler, one-time commander of Stratcom, or I guess in those days might have been SAC. President Obama and President Medvedev have committed themselves, and a fair number of people I know are sort of saying that now we're getting serious about this. Now, the pessimists predictably say there's a whole lot of problems with this, and there's arguments on what about states like Israel that depend on nuclear weapons as the equalizer. There's a book on how to get to zero that has a chapter by an Israeli, and he has a trenchant line in there that says that the whole world knows that Israel will be the last country to get rid of nuclear weapons. And I sort of sometimes say, oops, there goes the whole ball game. The most serious objection, I think, could leave aside states like Israel that may feel they need nuclear weapons to guarantee their existence against hostile neighbors. The most serious objection is old-fashioned prisoner's dilemma. That says, won't people suspect each other of cheating? Or won't they be tempted to cheat? Or won't they be afraid that they're being falsely accused of cheating? And if you're in danger of being falsely accused of cheating, you fear the other side will cheat because they suspect you, and then, of course, you have to protect yourself by confirming their fears, and you're off to the races. And I tend at the outside, Thomas Schelling was one time an important mentor of mine, and has himself indicated that he doesn't see a clear path or an easy path or a stable path to getting to zero. And I lean that way. I respect the work of some of the proponents who are, in many cases, very thoughtful on this and assembling some thoughtful thinking on it. And some of the proponents sort of say, look, all this business about mutual fear and suspicion, the danger of a prisoner's dilemma situation is very hypothetical. And it's classic political realism. You know, it's realism run rampant. John Mearsheimer was once a student of mine, though he didn't learn very much from me of what he's famous for. But John's proposition, of course, is in international anarchy, nobody can trust anybody, and then the worst always happens. Now, my own sense is the challenge that this is all hypothetical, how do we know that any of this would happen, is one that I'm tempted to take on because I am a very amateur historian. I love to read history, unlike most political scientists who want to dismiss it or get it. My reaction is if someone tells me take a break, relax, I say, okay, I got to find a detailed history of the Fashoda crisis. That's fun, or whatever. Or detailed history of various other things. So this was an excuse for me to take on the question of what do we know from the last time we were at zero about the stability of mutual anticipations or the instability of mutual anticipations. And these are the years up to 1945. In some ways from 1939 to 1945. 1939, of course, is when the first example of actual fission occurred, and Otto Hahn carried it out and then communicated by mail with Lise Meitner, who had to leave Germany and was in Sweden, and Lise Meitner deduced together with her nephew on a ski trip across the snows of Sweden that this had to be fission, and the word was out within a month or two that the whole world buzzing about the possibility. Now, how to do the research this late is an interesting puzzle for me. I kick myself because when I was at Cornell for many years, I had a very friendly senior colleague, Hans Bader, who used to come to seminars. We used to do multidisciplinary seminars on arms control, whatever, and he would dutifully come, and we could talk and so forth. And some of you may know Hans Bader, knew him when he was still alive. A very Germanic gentleman. It used to be a joke between me and my wife that middle of the fall on a certain date he would put on his overcoat. And in the middle of the spring at a certain day he would take off his overcoat. And we would all say, how very German. The rest of us would wait and see whether it's cold or warm outside. Very patriotic German. His father was a very patriotic German. A very senior physicist who studied under Werner Heisenberg and had him as a mentor, who, of course, all these people have Niels Bohr as mentors. And if I had gotten going on this, if I decided to do this 30 years ago, I could have pumped him and pumped other people who were alumni of the project, the Manhattan Project. It's too late for that, but it's not undoable, because for me, it's going back to all the accounts of how the Manhattan Project evolved and what the fears were of everybody else, and looking at the little sidebars as to, okay, why? The Germans may be making the bomb, ergo we have to beat them to it. And then does everybody say, well, that's self-evident? And the answer is almost yes, but then once in a while there's a little bit thrown in there, because unless we do it, X, Y, and Z will happen. And I'm collecting those nuggets of what looks like contemporary strategic reasoning, or from the point of view of an optimist, excessively abstract and excessively pessimistic strategic reasoning, and saying, do they occur earlier, and in what context do they occur? Now, I mentioned Otto Hahn's breakthrough. People have been speculating even earlier. I guess Enrico Fermi had speculated about an atomic bomb back about 1934. Even earlier, H.G. Wells, wrote a science fiction novel published shortly before World War I began, in which he talks about nuclear fission. Now, he's just guessing. I mean, he was a science fiction writer. He wasn't a serious scientist, but it's eerie that he's talking about the massive explosive power coming out of fission processes of the fish and splitting the atom. And Wells's book ends with mutual deterrence. Basically, he says there will be no more wars once there's been a round of all this city destruction, and the world will back off, which is, of course, what was one of the initial conjectures after Hiroshima. Maybe this will be the end of all war. Even earlier, Alfred Nobel, who endowed the Nobel Peace Prize, was, of course, he did that because he felt very guilty about coming up with dynamite and the uses to which it could be put. And he predicted that soon there'd be even bigger explosives, and that they would lead to perhaps an end to warfare. And so the prospect of mutual deterrence is hardly something that had never been discussed, and that's a sidebar. There's other aspects of deterrence, economic deterrence, the application of British naval power, et cetera, before the atomic bomb, before aerial bombardment began. I'll say a few words about different theories of what the Germans actually were doing, because this sets the stage for what happened in the United States and Britain, and to some extent in the Soviet Union. There are very conflicting theories. I mean, I have a sense there's at least 2 books a year on the German nuclear program, and one of them usually takes the side of saying the Germans abstained. The remaining German physicists who weren't Nazis but had stayed in Germany decided to sit on their hands deliberately to avoid producing nuclear weapons. And the counter view is that, oh no, they were a bunch of incompetents, and all the competent physicists had fled and had to flee. They were either Jewish or too liberal or whatever. And then I think there's an in-between view that says some mistakes were definitely made by the German physicists, but they also were hoping that it would be too big a project for anyone to produce an atomic bomb in World War II. And they were relieved to get instructions from Speer and from Adolf Hitler saying nothing that won't produce a weapon within the duration of this war is to be funded. And they could, feeling very patriotic, say, all right, we've told our fellow Germans that it would be a waste of time, a waste of energy, especially with all the British and American bombardment of Germany, to try to make nuclear weapons. It can't be done. And then crossing their fingers and saying, and maybe it can't be done anywhere else in the world. Now, I won't get into them, but there's some interesting counterfactuals here. One of them that fascinates me is, what if there had not been a Nazi takeover in Germany in 1933, which was by no means inevitable. I mean, many reconstructions of German history, it could have been avoided. Bad luck for the world and bad luck for Germany that it wasn't. Who would have had the advantage in a nuclear arms race, quote unquote, if people like Hans Bethe hadn't been forced to flee Germany, and if people who had virtually everyone who is involved in nuclear physics at this point has studied at places like Göttingen, and you could say in an arms race between Weimar Germany and somebody else, say France, who would have had the advantage in terms of reaching for nuclear weapons first? The counter view, of course, is maybe with a democratic Germany and a democratic France and a democratic Britain and the United States, there wouldn't have been a nuclear arms race. And that's a sidebar that I'm tempted to think about and get into a little bit, but it's not central to the story. Would nuclear weapons have evolved if there had been no World War II? Would nuclear weapons have evolved if there had been no Nazi Germany? If you were very pessimistic, you could have said then, okay, the places that would have had the advantage in reaching for the bomb would have been the closed societies like the Soviet Union and fascist Italy, looking from 1932 forward. But let me start, because I was told to stay to about a half an hour, and I'll try to, being a professor, that means I'll hit about 45 minutes or something like that. Let me lay out the similarities between that time and some post-total nuclear disarmament world that I see. And this is sort of a ring of pessimism, that I see 4 or 5 issues that get raised now, get dismissed by believers in nuclear disarmament, and that I think have come up before. And then after doing that, let me lay out a little bit my list of important differences from 1942 to 2042 that might make all the difference in the world. And then what I really come for, of course, is getting your feedback. So I'm going to grab my pen and start stealing ideas like mad from people around the table, which is what a seminar is all about. On the first point, is prisoner's dilemma something itself that is not likely to happen? I'd say I'm very pessimistic. All of you know about Heisenberg's visit to Bohr in 1941 in Copenhagen, and there's a very nice BBC production of the play. Some of you may have seen the play in London or in New York. Netflix will offer you the TV production of it. The TV production and play don't do justice to the facts. The facts are, of course, very much more complicated, but it brings out a lot of the nuances. And what I would simply throw out to you is that Bohr and Heisenberg knew each other much better than I've ever known any of my graduate students or my mentors or whatever. And it's extraordinary how close they were, that they would go on skiing vacations together, their wives knew each other, that Heisenberg had played with Bohr's children, and Heisenberg sort of felt he had learned an awful lot from Bohr, and similarly, Heisenberg and someone like Hans Bethe knew each other very well. And all the people in the nuclear physics community at the time knew each other very well. And still, there's this crucial meeting where Heisenberg goes up to visit Bohr in Copenhagen. This is when the Germans have occupied Denmark, not the best time in terms of politics. And Heisenberg tries to have a conversation with Bohr, carefully choosing a time when they can be out walking in the park, because Heisenberg correctly is worried that Bohr's apartment might be bugged by the Gestapo, and that what he's going to suggest might be troublesome or treasonous. And Heisenberg says something like, "Don't you think it would be best if all the physicists of the world avoided making nuclear weapons?" And Bohr's reaction is, "What are you telling me? What are you telling me?" And it goes from there. And then Bohr afterwards says that he suspects that Heisenberg was saber-rattling, warning Bohr that that Germany is making nuclear weapons, or that Heisenberg is pumping Bohr about what does he know about the British and Americans, or that Heisenberg is trying to trick Bohr and tricking the West into not making nuclear weapons. This is all the point where Bohr, at the start of that conversation, has been firmly of the opinion no one can make a bomb within 5 years. It'll probably take 25 years and bankrupt anybody economically doing it, use up more than half the electricity you have, and so forth. So Bohr, at this point, is personally convinced that it can't be done. When he escapes to Sweden and gets to Britain and out to Los Alamos, he's still not sure whether it can be done. When he gets to Los Alamos and sees how far we've gone, he's convinced that it can be done. But so this is the context that says if two people who knew each other that well could miscommunicate that badly, what's the possibilities of the world staying away from needless suspicion in the future? I'll give some other examples. The Soviets had espionage agents inside the Manhattan Project, but showing you the atmosphere at the time, Beria and Stalin distrusted what the spies were telling them, saying this is probably disinformation, it's a trick to get us to waste our resources on foolish things like nuclear weapons. And so if in an atmosphere like 1941 and 42, 43, where Beria doesn't trust his own spies, you say, how in the world could anybody trust each other in a future world? Secrecy is an issue here. There's a big debate in Washington amongst the physicists who knew anything about should there be a continued flow. For a while there was, suddenly 4 journal articles a month about nuclear fission in 1939. Should this all be stopped because it will encourage somebody else to make the bomb? Or should and in the end, I guess Leo Szilard persuades Fermi that there should be a self-censorship on this. How is this seen in other places? In a few places, in Germany and Russia, it's seen as a sign the Americans must be making a bomb. And in the case of the Soviet Union, there's a senior Soviet physicist who, around the time of the Battle of Stalingrad or before then, girds himself to write a memo to Stalin, and takes some guts to do that, but he gets it sent. It says, Comrade Stalin, the Americans have stopped publishing articles about nuclear physics. We published an article ourselves about nuclear physics, and there's been no American comment on it. This is a bad sign, and we must be making a bomb. And so you're in that world that says if you publish a lot and talk about this, you alarm people. If you don't, you alarm people. If you say, wouldn't it be great if we didn't do it, that's a bad sign. If you said, wouldn't it be interesting if we all did it, that's a bad sign. I come away on a pessimistic tangent here saying, let's wonder how anybody can communicate if these people couldn't communicate. And there's also a case of Russians at one point in part of Lend-Lease asked for some uranium. Groves, who is in charge of the Manhattan Project, says, give it to them, but if we deny it, they'll suspect something, and you're into that kind of a loop. A second proposition that comes at me from people who believe in disarmament say, look, even if somebody else is cheating and making nuclear weapons, there'll be no need for us to do so. There's no logic behind we have to do it if somebody else is doing it. And I'd say, okay, but when Einstein signed the letter that was drafted, I guess, by Fermi, and when the letter got delivered to Franklin Roosevelt, I guess someone named Sachs was delivering the letter. He wanted some sign from Roosevelt that he understood what this was all about. And Roosevelt said, I get it, we have to keep the Nazis from blowing us up. And the logic there that Franklin Roosevelt wasn't a newcomer to weapons. He had been Undersecretary of the Navy, whatever it was. The only way to keep the Nazis from blowing us up is to get nuclear weapons ourselves. And that gets into the business. Would you have to have nuclear weapons against a rogue state to dig out what he's doing, or would you have to have nuclear weapons to deter them? And it caught Roosevelt. It took Roosevelt about 20 minutes to come to that conclusion as the response to the description of what was possible in nuclear fission. Third one is, what if it turns out the other side isn't making nuclear weapons? So would you then succumb to the temptation to go ahead and get a monopoly by doing it yourself? Future scenario, hypothetical, and you say, okay, what about 1941, 42, 43? When General Groves started to come to the conclusion that the Nazis hadn't gotten much going, somebody said, well, that means we can wrap this up, right? And he said, oh, no, we have to go right ahead. Similarly, Franklin Roosevelt said, the signs that the Nazis aren't going to have the atomic bomb, does that mean that we plunge ahead with this. Roosevelt always gave this very high priority, very high priority. And the British had written something, the MAUD, M-A-U-D report, which basically describes the importance of getting the atomic bomb somehow before the Germans get it, but says it would be a good thing to do even if the Germans don't have it. You know, it'd be good to get this bomb. So again, is it a new idea for the future, not tested by time, that somebody be tempted, if he's preempting something where there's nothing to preempt, to go through with it? Lots of reasons. You have to just justify it to Congress, he spent all his money, or this is too sweet to pass up. I think this answers one of my earlier hypothetical questions. Most physicists at the time said, even if there hadn't have been World War II, this would have been too sweet to pass up. Somebody would have had to do this and make the atomic bomb. What about the option that a rogue state could grab the bomb and use it as the stopper deterrent to everybody else? And there's advocates of Global Zero now saying that isn't true. There's no way that a rogue state could just deter us by having an atomic bomb. On this, there's a very juicy quote, which I find amazing. Stalin is having a meeting with Averell Harriman shortly after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And as we all know, and I've taught my students for years, Stalin was a great poker player and pretended not to be impressed by atomic bombs until he had one. Right? You know, the right way to do it is pretend not to see any importance to a weapon that you don't have. But apparently Stalin was feeling very relaxed with Harriman, or maybe had too many vodkas, or just let himself go uncharacteristically, and said to Harriman, if Hitler had this, we couldn't have gone to Berlin. If Hitler had this, we couldn't have gone to Berlin. And a number of the people working on the Manhattan Project were, there's really stages of this. Are you worried about the Germans getting the bomb when it looks like the Germans are conventionally superior, that the gates of Moscow, or they've conquered all of Western Europe? Then later, when you know you have them beat conventionally, the Red Army is reaching Warsaw and you've landed in Normandy. At both stages, the feeling is we have to get the bomb before Hitler gets it. But what if he conquers Europe and has the bomb? But at the end stage, there's a few people in the Manhattan Project saying we have to make sure we beat Hitler to the bomb, because otherwise he could deny us the just punishment that he deserves. You know, that we couldn't impose regime change, couldn't go all the way to Berlin. For Stalin to admit that is a bit much. I'd say, oops, we learned afterwards, when we got all the documents after the end of the Cold War, that Stalin had told his physicists, there's nothing more important than the atomic bomb, get it, ask for whatever you need. Stalin's quote was, a baby that asks for milk, the mother will give it to him. Ask what you want, tell us what you want, and make sure you ask for everything that you can ask for. And so Stalin never was unimpressed by the atomic bomb, but for him to admit this to Averell Harriman is a bit strange. Now, I'd also say the real American decision to go ahead with the Manhattan Project isn't when that first letter is delivered to Roosevelt in 1939. It's more like a month before Pearl Harbor, not after, a month before Pearl Harbor, where finally people get back to Roosevelt, and he's appointed. The first round, he appointed someone who bureaucratically wasn't much of a wheeler or dealer and wasn't very energetic, and so not much was happening in 1939, 1940. 41, the energizer was some British calculations about how small the bomb could be, how little fissionable material would be required, which get relayed to the United States, and B, the fact that Hitler's armies are at the gates of Moscow, and that there's real doubt in America and in Britain on whether the Soviets can hold out. And then there's the image in the United States that says, if Hitler defeats Stalin, then within a year he'll be resuming his threat to invade Britain. What if the British have to surrender or whatever, then we'll be all by ourselves. And then, okay, an ace in the hole for the United States might be to have nuclear weapons in case the British are defeated by the Nazis. Last proposition that comes up is don't make the connection between nuclear weapons and the prevention of conventional war. That is all hypothetical. I think George Perkovich describes it as one of the fatuous 5 arguments against nuclear disarmament, and not that tired-old argument again that by having nuclear weapons around we prevent conventional war. Well, I simply say for an awful lot of the people in the Manhattan Project, terminating the conventional war was the driver. That over and over again, we're going to shorten this war. We're going to shorten this war. Groves, after Groves was in charge of the building of the Pentagon as a colonel. I sort of say grade inflation was really hit. Can you imagine a colonel today being in charge of building something as big as the Pentagon? And then he was offered a promotion to brigadier general if he'd take on this thing called the Manhattan Project. And he was unhappy. He wanted to see combat and be sent to Europe. And he was told, no, if you take this on, we'll make you a brigadier general, and you'll also probably shorten the war. And over again in the dialogue amongst the various physicists and various players is shortening the war. Another way to talk about extended nuclear deterrence, I think you have to remember that as late as 1944 and even early 1945, the Japanese forces were actually advancing inside of China. And it was even a risk that they might advance as far as Chongqing and force the nationalists out of the war. And it was, we remember the Japanese we're pushing them back island by island across the Pacific, but inside of China, there's a possibility of a knockout blow against the Chinese. I've several times had a chance to run some of these general linkages past Chinese student groups, and the question has always been, do you regret yourself that the Americans dropped the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And I've never yet had anyone tell me that they did. They ultimately put it together very quickly. He says, if that hadn't happened, there would have been a Japanese occupation here of Shanghai and of Beijing and a big hunk of China for at least another 2 years, at least another 3 years, and we were spared that. So there's a series, and this is not an exhaustive series, a series of propositions that the pessimists about nuclear disarmament regard as relatively sound, that the optimists say they need to be cross-examined, they need to be removed from simple hypothetical pessimism and so on. But my own hunt here is to say, okay, in a non-hypothetical world, the real world, the last time we knew all around the world that nuclear weapons were possible, and we're speculating about who could try to do it, that almost all these propositions get voiced by one of the other players. And now, let me note some important differences, and then see whether they are sufficient to restore some sense of optimism here. One important difference is obviously the big question now would not be, is the bomb feasible? That was the big question in 1939, 1940. And 1939, 1940 is literally a meeting in Britain where the speculation in Britain is that nuclear weapons are impossible. The Germans are going to leak the possibility of working on it to try to trick us British into wasting resources on this foolish quest. And somebody suggests that the British should leak that they're working on it to try to trick the Germans into wasting more resources on this. And to repeat myself, Niels Bohr, who gets to London when he was still in Copenhagen before, and he was able to communicate through Sweden to the British on various things. Niels Bohr is of the opinion that nobody's going to be able to do this, and just because it takes too much in the way of energy, too much in the way of resources. That was the big question then. By the middle of 1941-42, it becomes clear that at least one country can do it, the United States, which is not being bombed and which is relatively rich in resources. It's still an interesting sidebar that the Manhattan Project took something like 10% of the entire electrical capacity of the United States in 1943 or 44, and that the total floor space of the Manhattan Project is greater than the total floor space at the time of the auto industry. So it was a big investment that the United States went ahead with. Today, the question would be, is cheating possible? And I give you a replay of the Bohr-Heisenberg meeting. Somebody who was a senior physicist in one country talking to one of his former students, former junior colleagues, who comes in and says, do you think it would be good if all of us avoided experimenting with how to cheat and on IEA safeguards or on whatever verification there is? And would the reaction be, yes, you're right, we ought to get together and have a seminar on how we all pledge not to try to figure out how to cheat? Or would it be, whoops, what are you telling me? Are you brandishing the fact that you guys are already working on the project of how to fool the inspectors? Or are you bluffing and trying to trick me into that you're successfully evading inspection? And all the possibilities of misunderstanding there. But at least it's a different question. It's a very different question. A second question that makes everything very different, of course, is you don't have anything like Nazi Germany at this moment. And some of the advocates of going to zero would say, well, we live in a world where war is going to be much less likely in general, and where totalitarian dictators are nothing quite like Hitler. In fact, Niels Bohr's argument is, by all means, make the bomb against Hitler, but don't make it against Stalin. Don't withhold it from Stalin. Niels Bohr, so many words, thinks of Hitler as unique. Now, of course, having been a Dane under German occupation, that would color your weighting of things. And Niels Bohr was half Jewish and would have been one of the people that would have been rounded up if the Nazis hadn't tipped off somebody that they were going to round up the Jews. And the Danish Jews got away to Sweden. But there is this very important image of revenge. An awful lot of the people who were working the Manhattan Project were people who knew that they had relatives back in German-occupied Europe whose lives were in danger. I mean, you didn't have to know about the Holocaust. I don't think anyone in Los Alamos knew about the Holocaust in 1943 or 44, but you did know there were concentration camps, and you did know that people were being killed. You didn't know they were being killed in the millions. And an important driver here is fear, and an important driver is revenge. I'll illustrate it. Oppenheimer gives a speech to the assembled team at Los Alamos the day after, or a couple of days after Hiroshima, congratulating everyone. We did it by teamwork, we did it by hard work, whatever, and I'm glad we all worked together. And then he throws in a sentence which produces loud applause. He says, I think we all agree the only thing we regret is we didn't get the bomb finished in time to drop it on a German city rather than a Japanese city. And everybody applauds. And you say, well, what does that show? You're sorry the Germans surrendered before you could destroy one of their cities with a nuclear attack? German cities have been fairly heavily bombed in Hamburg and Dresden in conventional attacks. It shows an awful lot of hatred and a desire for revenge. And you say, was that a crucial ingredient to everything else we're reminded of? And is that a crucial ingredient that hopefully will be missing in the future? And that's an optimistic picture. It says, in the future, you may not have any regime like Nazi Germany that could activate so many people to feel this actual desire to destroy a city with a nuclear weapon. The British have rounded up, the British and Americans have rounded up all the German nuclear physicists they could find and had arrested them and taken them to a place in Britain at Farm Hall. Most of you know this. And the British had bugged the place that they stay and then took the long recordings of the German conversations when the news came out after Hiroshima. And one of the small problems with this is the British, being the British, have never released the entire text of all the recording. I often say the British probably have a secret clause in the Magna Carta that hasn't come out yet. The British attitude on secrecy is very different from the American attitude. And there's stuff on World War I that hasn't come out yet. But one interpretation of the recordings of the Germans was, hey, they're all sitting around saying, boy, we're incompetent. And a different one is to say, let's all agree that we didn't try hard to make the weapon. But the longer you stare at those transcripts, the more you sort of say it had to be slightly more complicated than that, not just simple incompetence and not simple we had a sit-down strike, but a mixture of saying we were hoping that the bomb wouldn't be possible and we were wrong. But there's one fellow named Wirtz, one of the senior German scientists, who said, well, even if we had made the bomb and gotten it, we could have destroyed London, but what would that have gotten us? It would have just been revenge, and we still would have lost, very different from Stalin's comment that if Hitler had the bomb, you could have preserved the Third Reich in a truncated form and couldn't go to Berlin. The role of an ongoing war is a war as big as World War II. And I think I would share the bet that there's good odds we won't have a conventional war the size of World War II in the next century, though one question is that because nuclear weapons are around? And another one is it because human beings have become more reasonable? Very important to note, the secrecy of the Manhattan Project itself is phenomenal. It staggers the mind that something that big, using that much in the way of resources, could escape congressional scrutiny, could escape press reports. There were some odd press reports here and there, leaks here and there, but nothing very big. And you say it was the atmosphere post-Pearl Harbor in the United States that made that possible. Without that kind of secrecy, could the United States have conducted something as big as a nuclear weapons program without it being known? There's evidence that the Germans and the Japanese had more than a little bit of curiosity about whether the United States was manufacturing nuclear weapons. One account says that the Japanese who had the Spanish embassy representing their interests in the United States actually had gotten a couple of the Spanish attaches to go driving around New Mexico, poking their nose into what's going on out here. And Japanese did have a team that was asking themselves the same question that the Germans were asking. Everybody's asking, can anybody make a bomb in the duration of this war? They concluded that they couldn't. When the first bomb went off, the question that was put to them immediately was, could it be that this exhausts the American capability? Because we all know it takes many, many hours and days to assemble uranium for a bomb. Could it be that this is 3 years' worth of uranium and it'll be another 3 years before we get hit again? So a sidebar issue of retrospective morality is always, was it necessary to hit Nagasaki as well as Hiroshima? Some people say it wasn't necessary to hit either one. Okay, I am going to wrap up momentarily. But the Japanese physicist who was called in was say, was this an atomic bomb? Yes. Was it possible that this exhausted the American arsenal? And he said yes. And when Nagasaki was reported, then the answer was, okay, obviously this hasn't exhausted the American potential. So my bottom line is we do have a dress rehearsal here. And I'm ready to throw it out here and say which way should I lean more. This is midway through a work in progress on my initial pessimism is there, so truth in advertising, but I'm ready to play the game for what it's worth, to say what are the important differences that might make for a more optimistic possibility. So thank you.
Thank you, George. We have a lot on the table. Questions? Howard? Wait for the microphone. Please identify yourselves and your institution.
Howard Moreland. My understanding is the first person to actually accomplish nuclear fission was Enrico Fermi, not in New York, but in Rome. And I think it was, 34 or 32? 34?
34, but he didn't know what he had done. And, yeah.
Okay. As I understand it, when the Germans announced fission 4 years later, they basically had the same information that Fermi had. If Fermi had realized that when he hit the uranium atom with a neutron and produced barium, that he had fissioned the bomb, he had all the information he needed to announce the discovery of fission. And I've often wondered what would have happened if Enrico Fermi had told the world, 1934, I have conducted nuclear fission, I have released so much energy, and all the possibilities are out there. 4 years before the word went out, how would that scenario have played out?
Yeah. Well, that is one of the big counterfactuals. It says, what if you didn't have this semi-amazing coincidence that the world recognized fission within 6 months of when World War II begins? It was this January of 1939 that Lisa Meitner communicates back to Otto Hahn that what you've obviously done is fission. And And then there's buzzing all around this town and other towns about, hey, it's been done, and the war breaks out in September 1939. On that same timing question, there is the fascinating business that Heisenberg is free to travel, and in the early summer of 1939, comes to the United States, wanders around campuses, gets together with Hans Bethe. I just have a vision of, it's up in Rochester they meet. I have a vision of, Hans Bethe driving up from Ithaca to Rochester, was out to Michigan, I guess, maybe even been out to California. I was talking to all the physicists who were later working for the Manhattan Project, and they're saying to him, why wouldn't you stay here? Why in the world would you go back to Germany? And he comes up with this folderol about, if I don't go back, I can't protect the younger physicists in Germany from crazies who believe that Einstein is wrong, and so on. So naturally the suspicion is maybe he's going back to work on the bomb. People who know him well say he can't be, he's not a Nazi, but saying he'll be under pressure to work on the bomb. Come back to the question you're posing. If fission had been clearly discovered when the Nazis had just come to power, or before the Nazis had come to power, might be very different in the timing of whatever gets launched and doesn't get launched. As it happened, it became a well-established fact that fission had occurred, not just hypothetical, but theoretical, but real, almost at the same time as World War II begins. And some people have said if the two hadn't gone together, there might not have been an atomic bomb. That's a counter is it might have been an atomic bomb somewhere else. The British, if they hadn't gone through the Blitz, hadn't been under bombing as late as 1944, might have elected to go for nuclear weapons all by themselves. On my point about American secrecy, I'd say, hey, Britain is a democracy, but it's, as I noted in tongue-in-cheek, Britain is capable of more secrecy than the United States is. And what would Winston Churchill, of course he might not have been prime minister, what would Winston Churchill have done if he had the option of making the bomb? What would Stalin have done if he had the option, if nobody was racing against Nazi Germany? It was all up there in possible counterfactuals, and with the important result of the timing being that the world is saddled with nuclear weapons since 1945. Yeah. Sorry.
Sam Wells here at the center. George, I've gone through a lot of the Soviet documents on the early days of their nuclear program, and it does seem that Stalin was not very interested during the war in pushing the nuclear program. They started a program in 1943. It didn't have top resources. It didn't have the top scientists. It didn't have the imprimatur of putting Beria in charge of it. So it's only after Hiroshima and Nagasaki that Stalin calls a meeting and says, I think this is important. I think we really have to do something about it. How do we do it? And they pick Kurchatov, and they set up these closed cities in the interior. And Stalin tells Kurchatov, you've got all the resources you need. You're going to have everything. Go for it. And, of course, Beria is there, and his qualities for inhumanity are known among all the scientists. And so they're working very hard, but they have real trouble getting there. Stalin keeps giving them the resources. And you know the story about when they finally get their prototype to test it. Everybody is petrified among the scientists that it won't go off because they suspect that they would all end up getting shot, which was, in fact, the plan. They had orders for assassination or major awards, depending on the outcome. So.
Hugh Haskell.
No, I'm sorry. Did you want to?
No, your rendition of history strikes me as exactly right. I think some of the factors are that in 1943, you're still not sure you're going to be able to push the Germans back, and so you still have all the costs of the war. So Stalin may, and you're discounting the reports from your spies in the Manhattan Project. What if this is disinformation? What if the Americans don't have a bomb? I guess Stalin gets the word that the Alamogordo test worked, and that should have triggered something. Some accounts that are very critical of our bombing saying Stalin was shocked by our using the bomb, and that if we hadn't used the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Stalin would never want to make a bomb. If you believe that, I have a car that I'm trying to sell. So my own theory is Stalin would have gotten the bomb once he had the resources and once he was sure that he wasn't being tricked by disinformation.
Hugh Haskell from Institute Energy and Environmental Research. Just a couple of comments. First, on the question regarding what Fermi would have or if Fermi would have understood what he did. That was realized about a few months later. An article in an obscure German publication claimed that what he had done was fission, but the publication was so obscure, and it happened. The author was a woman, which would have meant that she would not have been well taken, and it was ignored.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a second opportunity missed there. And the other thing on the Manhattan Project, I think it's probably unlikely that we could have done it if it hadn't been for the TVA, because there was probably no other source of power in the country that was under the control of the government that could have been diverted from its civilian needs.
No, okay.
My name is Stephen Shore. My two brief questions. The first is, have the circumstances of Heisenberg's visit to Bohr been fully examined? That is, are we certain that Heisenberg went purely on his own initiative, or was he instructed by others in Germany to visit Bohr? And wasn't there a heavy water plant in Norway that was a target of the Norwegian resistance under British supervision to blow up this heavy water plant?
Yeah. Second point, definitely, yes, the attacks on the heavy water plant are very important, partially because the Germans missed that you could moderate a reactor with graphite, and they thought the only way to moderate a reactor was with heavy water. And the British attacks on that, somewhat of an alerting to the Germans that the British are concerned about nuclear things, wasn't enough of an alerting to say, aha, let's go to the Fuhrer, let's go to Speer and make this fast track. The Germans at the end said, let's get a reactor, maybe that'll power submarines, or maybe that'll give us a source of energy. We need energy for war purposes in general. And you can say that was Heisenberg was secretly planning to make the bomb because he knew that you could get plutonium out of reactors. And you say, well, maybe, but maybe he was also trying to slow the Fuhrer down from making weapons and diverting them to something else. Now, on your first question was, I'm sorry.
Visit to Bohr.
Oh, the visit to Bohr. That was Heisenberg's idea. Now, he had to get permission. You don't just say, okay, Denmark is occupied by the Germans, so I'll just get in a train and go. You got to get permits and whatever. And he wangled it through, I guess, Weizsäcker's father was a senior foreign ministry official, and they wangled it as this is a way to try to make friends in Denmark, which you're encouraged to do. Go and give lectures about how under Nazi control Europe is going to be a nice place. Remember, Denmark was being governed reasonably because the Germans wanted to make this a model of how if you don't resist and if you're Nordic, you're blonde-haired and blue-eyed, you get treated well. And so Heisenberg got permission to go give lectures at an institute. Bohr, being a patriotic Dane, said, I'm not going to go to lectures that are sponsored by the Nazis. Heisenberg made the elementary mistake of saying that he thought, all things considered, the fact that the German army was advancing in Russia was good for Europe, and that didn't go well with the Danes. So, but still, Heisenberg and Bohr, the play brings this out very nicely, though I think, like all plays and dramas, there's a risk of drama going ahead of facts. They were extraordinarily close. Heisenberg wanted to consult with Bohr, but he talked about big things and small things, the purpose of life, the role of scientists, and so he wanted to run by Bohr a mixture of, does Bohr share his view that this is going to be very hard for anybody to do, and wouldn't it be nice if nobody tried? and it went over the wrong way. And of course, Bohr was upset because he had heard that Heisenberg had given this talk where he said it's good for Europe that the Nazis are advancing into Russia, holding back the Soviet barbarians, and not the right thing to say to work your way into the good feelings of Danes. But so it was not somebody else saying go to Bohr and trick him. In fact, what Heisenberg did is include a little diagram of what a reactor would look like, and gave it to Bohr. And various accounts say that would have been enough to land Heisenberg in the slammer in terms of the Gestapo, that you're giving away a secret of we're even thinking of what a reactor would look like. Bohr kept it, brought it along when he got out, brought it along to Los Alamos, and brought it to Los Alamos saying, here's what the Germans are looking at. And Hans Bader and others started laughing, saying, are the Nazis really going to drop a reactor on somebody? Is this what the German project is? And so basically, people at Los Alamos were already way ahead of Bohr and Heisenberg at this stage. There's sidebars on this to get juicy. I mean, some of you may know of the fact that Hans Bader was asked, along with somebody else, who should we assassinate in Germany if we assassinate anybody in an attempt to hold back the Nazi nuclear effort? And this is a question posed in 1942. And they naturally say, well, the most preeminent person is my old professor, Werner Heisenberg. So as of 1944, there's how many of you know the story? Moe Berg? Any of you know who Moe Berg was? Yeah, you got it. Moe Berg was a journeyman catcher in the major leagues in the 1930s with the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Red Sox, and he was also very bright. He'd gone to Princeton, studied some physics, could speak 8 languages, and people said he could strike out in every one of them. And Moe Berg, by this time, was working for the Manhattan Project and intelligence, is brought to Switzerland, and Heisenberg gets permission to leave Germany in December of 1944 to give a lecture in Zurich, which again is amazing. It says Nazi Germany is much more open with its physicists. Heisenberg got to Washington, New York in 1939, got to Switzerland, compared to Peter Kapitzer, when he went home to Russia, got arrested and couldn't leave Russia. And Moe Berg's assignment is to go to a lecture given by Heisenberg on physics with a pistol in his pocket. And if he decides, based on the lecture, that there's a serious nuclear program, he's supposed to kill Heisenberg, otherwise not. And Moe Berg goes to the lecture, and this is like an experience a lot of us have. Someone says, is anyone here able to escort Professor Heisenberg from the lecture back to the hotel this evening? And Moe Berg says, I know the way, I'd be happy to walk with him. and Moe Berg goes walking along, can speak German with a Swiss accent, which is quite a trick, and talks to Heisenberg about this and that, and from the abstruseness of Heisenberg's lecture and from the conversation, Berg decides he doesn't have to kill anybody for the first time in his life and keeps the pistol in his pocket. And when Heisenberg gets back to Germany, he gets into trouble because he's accused of having said some indiscreet things in Switzerland, like, we've lost the war. He says it would have been nice if we had won, but we really have lost the war. And he gets called in. He's in danger of being called in by the Gestapo on he was making defeatist comments when he went to Switzerland. And Heisenberg is convinced that Moe Berg must have been the Gestapo stooge who ratted him. And it isn't until a year afterwards, after 1946, he realizes, no, Moe Berg wasn't a Gestapo stooge. He was an assassin of the OSS who was supposed to... Now, I throw that out without any excessive speculation, saying, will physicists be marks for assassination in the future? And you say they are right now. Don't ride next to an Iranian physicist in a taxi in Tehran. Beware a bicyclist coming near you. They're going to be gunning for you. Again, I put it in the world we're speculating about, will physicists who know each other but don't know each other as well as these people knew each other be fingering each other for assassination? And my sense is you might have to do what some Iranian physicists are doing now, which is stay as far away from anything to do with fissionable materials as you can to get off the Israeli or other hit list. And Heisenberg, by giving an abstruse lecture on something else, got off the hit list in 1944.
Hi, Morris Klein, formerly of Los Alamos, retired. I was in the weapons program. I'm curious how we got, with all the technical problems on cross sections that the Dallenberger was unable to resolve, he didn't have pure carbon or something, how we decided to go two routes, uranium and plutonium, and the reason why we were able to drop the second bomb, and the reason why we could drop more bombs in succession, each one a month, I was told at one time, and they were on the way, was that we went the plutonium route, which had its own characteristic issues, technical issues. I don't want to repeat them here. And then the second question I have is that we had the bomb, no one else did, therefore we could use it. You alluded to that in your talk. And is that true today?
Is that true today? I'd say
In other words, a zero, I thought this was zero nuclear. If we went nuclear and someone else had it, would it be used?
Well, let me go to your second question first. My sense of the American nuclear monopoly is that the fact that we used it against the Japanese, but then didn't brandish it seriously and didn't use it against anyone else to preserve it, is itself a historical puzzle, which I once struck my neck out at some length on and started saying, in the end, it's American liberalism more than any other explanation that says Americans don't start wars. They finish them when somebody else starts them. And I've a number of times had a chance to talk to Russians, former Soviet, now Russian specialist arms control, and said, if Stalin had the bomb and we didn't, would he have allowed us to get it? And to a man, they say, no, he wouldn't. And my own sense is, would Winston Churchill have allowed anybody else to get it if he had it first and nobody else did? And I think Winston Churchill would have done what the British used to do at Copenhagen, sort of say, make sure when you have a monopoly or something, you keep it. On our choice of multiple paths, we were a rich country, and we were in a hurry, and we not only went plutonium and uranium, but several different approaches to enriching uranium, and one or two of which didn't pan out and were discontinued. And we were free of bombing and had resources, but also we assigned very high priority to this. I mean, if someone says the skeptics about nuclear zero are assigning too much priority to nuclear weapons, they're overrating how important nuclear weapons are, I'd say, well, what president do you have a picture of on your wall? And it's Franklin Roosevelt. I'd say he signed off tremendous resources to get us the bomb. Stalin did after 1946-47, after he saw what we could do, or after he realized something. But Roosevelt at all stages was saying almost the same thing. Ask for what you need and you'll get it. Speer at one point asked for Heisenberg to specify what he would need, and Heisenberg came in with such a low estimate that Speer turned to some Luftwaffe general in the room and rolled his eyes, saying, these people can't be serious. They're only asking for millions of marks, and I'm used to being asked for billions of marks. And so obviously this isn't going anywhere. Obviously, Heisenberg's retrospective justification of what he did is I kept physics alive in Germany. I protected young physicists from being drafted. I kept the labs going. And you say, that's window dressing, whatever. Well, Speer was accusing him of that by saying, you're asking for this small amount of money. You're obviously just trying to protect your scientific hobbies here. Show me something that can win the war. And Heisenberg's response was, I can't show you something that can win the war in less than 8 or 10 years. And I think the Americans are in the same position. Wrong. But he was right vis-a-vis, you can say, there was no way for the Americans to make a bomb to be used in time for the war against Germany. It turned out to be true. Even with all the resources we had, we were 2 months late to use it against Germany. So.
Carl Lundgren from Jonah Speaks. You're talking about, I guess, pessimism and optimism with respect to whether nuclear disarmament is possible. And I guess there would be two versions of nuclear disarmament. One being you get all the way to zero and nobody anywhere has a nuclear bomb of any kind. Okay. And the other is where you get very substantial reductions, and whether not thousands, maybe not even just hundreds, but maybe a few dozen worldwide, let's say. I mean, not going to specify what a future treaty might someday look like, but you have these two versions. One where there's always a few spare bombs around just in case somebody somewhere is cheating or some rogue manages to build them again, and the other where we literally try to be at zero and make sure everybody else is at zero.
I totally agree with the layout you've just given of the possibilities. And on the latter one that says we're not going to go to zero, we're going to go to low numbers, there's interesting possibilities with some interesting worries that says that low numbers will cheating become, you were supposed to have 20, we're supposed to have 20, but actually you've got another 50 hidden in the Black Forest, and what about that? But that's a different scenario. For the moment, taking seriously the people who talk about going to zero and saying at zero, which is what we had in the world in 1943, 1944, what kinds of hiccups do you have? What kind of mutual fears do you have? I've seen speculation right after the Cold War ended, speculation by some interesting former Soviets, Russians, saying what you want is small stockpiles and then a big one held by the UN. This is right after the UN looked good after Desert Storm, and this is finally collective security being what Woodrow Wilson envisaged. And George W. Bush was being congratulated for implementing the vision of Woodrow Wilson of what collective security would be all about. Since then, the bloom is off the rose on our conference in the UN again, and there's, all the sidebars. But if someone says they're going to come out and say they want to reduce to really low numbers, I always sort of say, all right, let's do the arithmetic then on whether that's stable or whether that engenders fears of cheating, fears. Again, my favorite is fears of cheating, fears of being accused of cheating. And if they're accusing us of cheating, we better cheat, which is unfortunately the way arms races work.
Oh, thanks, George. That was tremendous. Let me just, since we're at the end of the session, let me just sort of link this discussion to sort of, the contemporary debate in a way. I mean, right now there's kind of a public debate. I mean, to my mind, remarkable how kind of viral and public it's become about whether the United States or Israel should bomb Iran. And basically that's about, the character of a regime that's just where acquisition is just unacceptable because of the character of the regime. There's in some quarters a debate about what is the character of the Iranian regime, whether it's consistent with Article 4 of the NPT. As in some parts of the world, it's viewed as their fuel cycle activities is viewed as not a kind of a crossing a line, whereas among the European Union, the United States, there's a view that this is indeed kind of a weapons program. So if there are kind of two kind of vectors into this that link the history to the contemporary. One is, I'd like you to go back to that book you referenced on kind of the debate about what to do about Russia, the Soviet Union, in the late 1940s, and why the United States, because here you have a guy, Stalin, I mean, he killed 20 million people to collectivize agriculture. I mean, you could make a definite case about the character of the regime and the unacceptability of acquisition, nuclear acquisition. And how did the counterproliferation debate in the late 1940s sort of play out? And then link it, and then kind of the second vector into the debate now is if you got to a world of zero and you want to maintain a zero, you could be having this, not that there's so many countries whose capabilities, the technical side would raise the question of their intentions, but you could get into an Iran-type situation of how would you deal with an adversarial state whose nuclear intentions were in question and where to maintain the zero state. You might have to contemplate kind of this type of preemptive action. And the action that's being talked about, I mean, is conventional, the use of conventional. No one's saying that Israel would use there would be an Israeli nuclear attack on Iran to kind of to neuter it nuclear in terms of its nuclear capability. So could you just, it's sort of an open-ended question just to wrap this session up, and maybe it's unfair to do a bait and switch on you of a different topic at the end, but I just thought, given your experience and the writings you've done on related topics, whether you had any thoughts on that.
I was at a different lunch group about 2 weeks ago where people were talking about the options against Iran, and the consensus around the table was there's no good options, including sitting and letting the Iranians get nuclear weapons. That if the Iranians get nuclear weapons, that's pretty horrible, probably worse than Pakistan having them. But having Israel attack or having the United States attack or the United States and Israel together is also full of problems. There's speculation on a non-classified level that says the crucial weapons for digging out these underground facilities in Iran wouldn't be nuclear, but they'd be bunker busters that we have that the Israelis don't have. So we'd either have to give it to them or it'd have to be a joint venture. No matter what, whatever the Israelis do, we will be accused of being complicit. 98% of Iranians will automatically assume we were behind it, and almost everybody else in the Middle East will find that plausible. But there's no good ending to this, except for my favorite, which is away from this discussion, that says tighten the screws economically on the theory that sooner or later the Iranians may cry uncle and say it's not worth it to get the bomb if we want to keep any standard of living. The debate about whether economic sanctions work is always one of those endless ones that says they never work until the last day when the other side cries uncle. And economic sanctions, I thought, won World War I against the Germans, and if they ever bring Castro down, we'll say, hey, finally, after 28 years, it worked. See that? You just got to wait long enough. And the same in the case of Iran. Now, the analogies are, again, Franklin Roosevelt, a month before Pearl Harbor, is persuaded we have to make the bomb against Hitler. That's big. That's big. Harry Truman isn't convinced in 1945 that we have to brandish the bomb against Stalin. And we're going to brandish it a little bit. There's evidence of we saber rattled a little bit vis-a-vis the Russian occupation of northern Iran in 1946, and et cetera. And we moved bombs forward or bombers forward in Britain in 1948. But we never threatened the Soviets unless you knock off your nuclear enrichment and so forth. There'll be nuclear war. So, again, a lot of people until late in the day said Hitler is sui generis and Stalin isn't in that category. And people will even debate that about Iran, say, all right, there's Ayatollahs who talk about wiping out Israel, but a lot of us know Iranians, because there used to be hundreds of thousands of Iranians in the United States, students or whatever. And occasionally I talk to American professors who go to Tehran and suddenly being greeted by all their former students who come racing in to see Professor Rosenau or whatever and hear him talk. And Tom Schelling went over to Iran and tried to get somebody serious to talk to him about nuclear weapons, and in the end nobody would, but a lot of other people were ready to talk to him. And, it's a long-winded way of saying if you want to draw the comparison of how Roosevelt saw Hitler in 1941 and how you and I would see Iran right now, or how everybody saw Stalin, the other people say there's differences. And,
One more question. Just yes, Professor. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Willie Curtis from the Naval Academy. I just want to throw this out to George. I've been toying with the idea of what I call nuclear-induced rationality. In the case of the Soviet Union and China itself, previously the Mao had essentially uttered some words that was completely crazy as far as we're concerned regarding even if we had a nuclear change from the U.S., that they could actually, because of their population, survive that. But at some point, even when we were against the Russians acquiring nuclear weapons, and then the Chinese, because we thought the leader Mao was crazy, or however you want to describe it. Once they acquired the nuclear capability, we adjusted. And we seem to have adjusted to the North Koreans having it. So I'm thinking nuclear-induced rationality not only changed the perspective of the leaders on our side, but there's some historical evidence that the leaders on the opposite side changed their views about their deal is. And this might be possible with the Iranians because, as you say, I mean, when I got my PhD, a good friend of mine was an Iranian. And so I just tossed it out.
Well, there are a number of responses to your point. Back when the Chinese were getting nuclear weapons, they were about to get into the Great Cultural Revolution, and you sort of said, my God, how can anyone deal with the Chinese? Because they're beating each other up in the streets, and professors are being humiliated. And the special show, Mao took nuclear weapons seriously. He let the Red Guards go after everybody except the nuclear weapons designers. And the Red Guards came and said, these people, they think of themselves as experts. They're not really red. We should humiliate them. Mao said, nope. That's out of bounds. Once the Chinese got nuclear weapons and got over the Cultural Revolution, the world has changed. And now, almost anybody in the room would say, we can't count on that generation after generation. North Korea is going to be like China. Well, watch and see that Iran's going to mellow and decide to let 100 flowers bloom. Or there's a place in Middle East for Israel. We're looking for the earliest possible sign of some reasonable statements coming out of there. How a few of the people who were thinking about nuclear weapons vis-a-vis Hitler envisaged mutual deterrence. They had this vision that says, we better beat the Nazis to the bomb, but it might be a dead heat. And that says, well, at least if we have the bomb before they're able to use it, we can deter their use, and they can probably deter ours. But whether people speculated far beyond that, saying we'll have to stop the firebombings of Hamburg and Dresden as part of that deal or not, is not something I've found yet. Again, you can tell what I'm doing is going through history books one after another and saying, oh, wait, here's a little sidebar that is grist from my mill. And for me, this is a great excuse to read a whole lot of history again. It says, and say, I'm the kind of political scientist who reads history for fun. There's not many of us, but there's a few. So.
Yes, there was a question in the back.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm Chris Lindborg with the British American Security Information Council, and I was struck by how you mentioned time and again the mistrust and miscommunication among the historical actors, and we're faced with the problem of prisoners' dilemma going into the future. And it seems that not only are we kind of struggling with trying to get to zero, but this kind of makes me think that we're looking at a pretty bleak future, maybe 20 or 30 years from now. What about proliferation? Will you be covering that at all in your book going forward, just considering the future, what 20 or 30 years out, maybe, there could be 20 more nuclear powers? Is this something that you'd be comfortable with speculating on right now just a little bit, or is this something you might cover in your book? Thank you.
Let me speculate with you just in quick response to your question. If someone says there's going to be 20 or 40 nuclear powers if we don't do something, I'd say I've heard that many times before, and it always turns out as one or two more and not 20 or 24 or 40. And I spent 3 years in the Air Force as a weather forecaster, and let me tell you that weather forecasting is a lot like predicting nuclear proliferation. You err on the pessimistic side, but if you're wrong, nobody minds, and if you're right, you call it. And of course, the important difference is that nobody ever made a tornado happen by predicting it, but you might make nuclear proliferation happen if you say everyone's going to get the bomb, everyone's going to get the bomb. My current list of worries would be North Korea, and then we have to make sure the Japanese don't follow immediately, and obviously Iran, and worry about Saudi Arabia renting bombs or getting bombs from Pakistan. The broader point is some people say don't take Obama and Medvedev and all these things seriously. They know that we'll never go to zero. It's just we have to say this and pretend we're going that way as our concession to the non-proliferation effort. We'll never get the serious, sensible countries of the world to really cooperate fully in preventing proliferation unless we make a show of implementing, I guess it's Article 6 of the NPT. And if I'm just tilting at a windmill here that says George Shultz and Henry Kissinger and Perry and they're just doing showmanship for the sake of conning cooperative countries and are doing more to stop proliferation, I'd say, all right, I'll go along and say the emperor has clothes, and even though privately I think the emperor doesn't have clothes. Preventing proliferation would have to be part of this total package that says we're going to zero, and that makes it much harder. The IAEA gets a lot of unfair criticism for not being really effective at catching violations of the NPT. I'd say, and a few cases it's true, but in a lot of cases it's the false pessimism on the part of the news reporters. But the task would be so much more demanding if we were at zero, and the IAEA has to verify the former Soviets, the Russians, the British, the French, the Chinese, and us to make sure that nobody's cheating in those countries. So that's a different extrapolation that says, look at how difficult it is for the IAEA to reassure people that country 17 isn't going to be making the bomb. But if you want to try to go to zero, another way to say what I just said is, for country 17 to get the bomb doesn't revolutionize the world. For country 1 to get the bomb again might revolutionize the world. I would be nervous if somebody else was the only country in the world that had the atomic bomb. That's the question somebody posed before. And you say, well, the world didn't get that nervous when the United States had a monopoly, except for the Japanese. So.
Sadly, we're out of time. Please help me thank George for a very useful talk.